This is The Pastor's Heart. Dominic Steele here. Thanks for joining us. Today we're talking living and fishing in Babylon. And we have two gurus, David Robertson, formerly of Scotland and now of Sydney, and Steve McAlpine from Western Australia.
Almost as far as Scotland.
That's right. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with you, Steve. Culturally, what's going on?
Culturally, a lot at the moment, and I think we're in that place of rapid discontinuous change. We've geared ourselves to think the future's going in one direction, but it seems to take shifts all over the place, as the last election probably showed us. But I think we're in a place where it seems more hostile for Christians walking in the public square, in life in general. And my experience in church is that many of the younger Christians are going, well, we've got 40 or 50 years of this to go. How about you older guys, lead us, give us a direction, a way to go. How do we live this life that's going to be much more hostile and confronting, just to do the normal stuff? Work is going to be a place where there's a little bit more pushback. Social agendas in work are much stronger. How do we navigate that space as Christians? It does feel more Babylon for many people, I think.
Yeah. Just when we go on to, I want to dig deep on the culture in a moment, but you wrote quite an important blog post a couple of years ago about Babylon, Athens, those kind of things. Can you just give us a quick recap? Because there'll be a lot of people who are tuning in now who won't be aware of that.
Yeah, it was interesting that I wrote that blog post, that there was a feeling that somehow the church experience that I had maybe 10 years before, of where we're going to have a disinterest in church, that church will have to try and make itself more relevant because we're just being ignored. That was a strategy, and it felt like church was just something that's going to fade away quietly. And that was what I called an exile stage one. We were being sidelined quietly. My experience became, though, that it felt more like we were being dragged into the public square and given a beating. It felt like exile stage two was going to have to be about resilience. It was going to have to be about how do we navigate a hostile, interested public square rather than a passive, disinterested public square. We're going, yoo-hoo, we're over here, and the next thing there's shots flying over our head. Maybe our strategy had to change. And the outflow of yes, that's right from people was astonishing to me, that it articulated something that people felt but couldn't quite say themselves. And so on that basis I thought, yeah, I've read the culture right on this one. Now our job is not to try and be the culturally relevant thing, and Mark Sayers writes about this in his book Disappearing Church, and he's just got a new one out, a reappearing church. And I'll be interested to see what does reappearing church looks like. How resilient how do we build resilience for what I think is this second stage of exile, which, you know, all things considered, will probably go for some time. We don't know the variances of it, but it's going to be a time where it's going to be more confronting to be a Christian. And if you rock up on Sunday to church, it's because you are one, and you've signed up. You've got skin in the game, I think.
More confronting to be a Christian, David. Is it soft and cushy in Australia compared to harder in Scotland?
Yeah. You're heading where we are, I think, and we're still heading down. Although there are one or two signs that maybe we're going to hit the bottom soon and rebound, or even that some of the rebound has begun. What Steve is describing is pretty well where you're at. I mean, where we're at. That if you've still got a few people who are traditional cultural Christians. And we've still got that, some. But cultural Christianity is not going to survive in the UK, I don't think.
It's not strong enough.
It's not, no. There's no...
And that's what Philip Jensen was saying to us a couple of weeks ago.
Why should it survive, you know? But what does survive? So let me just give you one personal example. My daughter... I sat down with her, and before she went off to university, my oldest daughter, who's now in Australia, and I said to her, sweetheart, I need to have the talk with you. And she looked at me and she said, Dad, I had that with Mum when I was about 10 years old, you know. and I said, no, it's about going to university, and, you know, you're going to meet people there. And she just looked at me and she shook her head and she said, Dad, I survived Morgan Academy, which is a school she went to, where half the class said they were bisexual, where that was the in thing then, where nobody in her class was a Christian. And I thought, do you know this? She's right. university, she's going to meet Christians. She's a committed believer. I have no worries about her at all, actually. She's not coming from this very sheltered environment. And I think what Steve is describing is this. I think the tendency amongst churches is to try and create a sheltered environment from an understandable desire to protect the flock. Whereas I think we need to be teaching our flock to be more robust,
Yes.
to be confrontational without being aggressive, we're not marching to protect Christendom, we're teaching people to stand up in the gale. Or another expression I use since I've come to Australia and I'm now an Aussie, I've never ever done it, but I'll talk about it, ride the wave.
Yeah.
You've got to ride the wave.
Yeah, and for me, the issue, it's a bit like, digital technology. I'm technologically challenged.
Yes.
Because I'm not...
Follically challenged.
Yeah, follically challenged and technologically challenged. I tick so many bad boxes. But, I'm not a digital native. But my kids are digital natives, and that's the air they've breathed in. They breathe, and they've been swimming in that water, to mix my metaphors. But my daughter is also similar to your daughter in that sense, that she sees the challenge of the secular frame, but she's the post-Christian native, whereas our generation have been in the crossover. We've seen the slide off. But if it's the new normal for you growing up, a young Christian person can have resilience built in without hankering for a past that never existed for them. Yeah.
But that's a good way to describe it, because if I was to say to my kids, we used to have phones that were plugged into a wall and that you dialed, and if they're going, what?
Yeah.
A world without a mobile phone. and then you realise, well, that is because I moved to Australia and I'm trying to get a bank account. I can't get a bank account without a mobile phone. And then to my parents, who are in their 80s.
It's absurd.
That's absurd.
Yes.
What do you mean you can't have a bank account without a mobile? Why is the mobile phone such an essential part of your life? But it is, for the vast... But most people under 30 here, I think, so you guys can correct me on this, are in that world. They've never known any other world. But often church leadership, we're in lots of different worlds, I think.
Yeah, well,
that's true.
My thought was I came out of theological college and I worked out, I'd had a great theological education. I was totally equipped to communicate the gospel well to modernists.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
I had no idea how to communicate the gospel to postmodernists.
Yeah.
And now we're dealing with something...
It's even an extension of that. In one sense, the postmodern raising of the ground was not designed to give everyone a say on everything. It was designed to build a new reality. And our young people are going, well, Babylon is bright and shiny and it's got a narrative. How do we counter that? And I think, we're the generation that we've got of Christians, they're not the snowflakes about this. Our generation, we're the ones.
Yeah, it's the
about
older ones who I use, again, going back to my daughter in Australia. She's the only person who can really argue me, I think, certainly to me. But I used to call her, her generation snowflakes, and she pushed back on me, and she was right. Although I hate to admit it, I don't think it's her generation that are the snowflakes. I think we are the ones who've become that. The postmodern thing is really interesting, because when we're talking about living in the church and the resources. So I had a kind of Damascus Road experience a little bit in terms of outreach and evangelism when I was speaking at the University of Stirling in Scotland, and the president of the Atheist Society stood up and said, okay, you've destroyed my atheism, what do you believe? I told him. He says, why do you believe it? I started to give him reasons, and I thought, no, I believe this because of Jesus. And then he looked at me and he said, who's Jesus? And I realized he had a vague idea of who Jesus was. But that's what most people have, a vague idea, even within the church. I thought, I need to give you a book about Jesus. I couldn't find one. So I ended up writing one. That's how the Magnificent Obsession thing came about. Because it was written for postmodern under 40s.
Yeah.
And there's something refreshing about that, isn't there? Because there's not the baggage coming with it. And so we've seen conversions at church through people coming from absolutely no understanding at all.
Yeah.
And I see God working in someone's life that we thought we've got to make church this way or that way. And they just rock up because they were hungry for something other than what they've got. So I've liked the way in which people are looking for something to fill them and they can't find it in the culture, and they're going, I'll explore something new. It's almost radical to look to Jesus as the answer these days.
So tell us about your church, Steve. Are you in Perth or in the country?
Well, Some people in Perth would say we're in the country. No, we're about 20. The church we're in is about 20 kilometres out of the city, so 18 to 20 kilometres out of Perth. But it's a hard
what's it
struggle.
called?
It's called Providence Church Midland. So
Yep.
we have a Perth city.
That's Rory Shiner's
That's Rory
church,
Shiner.
yep.
So Rory's the network director of all the Providences. Midland started in our house.
Kind of like the bishop, really.
Kind of like the bishop.
I've heard of this Rory Scheider. I thought he was Pope.
No, he's the young Pope. But we started it in our lounge,
Yep.
and a couple of people came along who weren't Christian, because one of them said to me, he just wrote to me after meeting me once, and he said, I've got questions about life. Do you think you could answer them? And I went, I'm too busy writing about postmodern evangelism. Oh yeah, that's core practice.
Yeah.
I better do that. And so I sat down with, this is what I did. I sat down with him in my lounge with the book of Romans, and I said, so are you thinking of looking at spirituality? He went, no, done it. Spent a lot of money going to Canada to meet a guru, waste a lot of time and money looking at all these spiritualities. If you've got nothing to give me here, I'm out of hope.
Yeah.
I went,
Romance.
and the next week he was converted. Within a month his wife was converted.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, they had no church experience whatsoever. Now our church is built of post-church people, or people who did church, but a lot of people coming in and going, I've been to church but I'm a bit vague about where it's all headed. I haven't got a big biblical picture. And so what we've spent a lot of time doing, and our biggest growth cohort is 20s to 30s,
Yep.
is dealing with giving you the big picture. What is the narrative of the Bible? How does it make sense? And because we want to make sure that it's believable, it's livable, believable, and true in that order, in that sense, that people, they're Christian, they've grown up in churches, but they're going, that didn't prepare me as well as I thought I needed to be. I need something more about the Bible. I've got to get to understand what the Bible's about. And then doing that in community. So they're very strong in their sense of community together, and they've loved the return, for me, not for them, for many it's new, of a stronger liturgical framework to church.
Really?
And we're, non-conformists, not Anglican, but we have communion every week. And there was pushback at the start about that. Now they wouldn't do without it. We make sure that we're doing things where we're pressing into the ancient, because people want something that's tangible, that's a link to the past. So, for example, vinyl is back. Have you noticed that?
Yeah,
Records.
yeah.
My 18-year-old daughter was bought for her birthday. Her friends banded together, bought a record player. What is she buying? She's buying the Beatles, George Harrison, 1970s stuff,
Pink Floyd,
all those. And she said to me, when I sat down and put the first Beatles album on, I got that feeling that you must have had in 1963 when that young 18-year-old girl put the hiss and then the start of a track. I thought, that's because we love the past and history. We want a link to the past.
Yeah.
And I think Christianity, when it does that well, when it says we're not just about, this slice of life now, but we have a long history back, it's deep, that's become attractive to young people.
How do you, I'm just intrigued by the Lord's Supper every week.
I know it's not an Anglican thing.
I'm just thinking, let me push that around for a second.
Sure.
How do you deal with the unbeliever who wants to comes along?
We don't have any expectation that everyone will come who's a believer, and we do say this is for believers.
Because it feels to me like, oh, that's a big mark of I'm not included at that point.
Yeah. Well, so we'll welcome people, but we are okay to say, actually, you're not included in this. But you belong with us here today. We wouldn't have any other barrier, but we say this is for Christians.
And why is that not good?
Yeah,
because actually,
you do want to draw a line.
I want to do. So
that's what I want to do.
In the old Highland Presbyterian tradition, people would go forward to the table.
Yeah.
They would actually get up out of their seats.
We still do that.
And they would go and sit at the table, and you'd have families where there'd be one partner going sitting at the Lord's, the other not. You could not get a more dramatic picture in church, liturgically, of the sheep and the goats. And I know the profound effect that had on many people. So I mean, in my immediate previous church, we didn't do that, and I felt we kind of missed out a little bit. I thought sitting at a table together, or identifying, it was almost
Yeah,
You know,
well, we come forward.
it's a sacrament.
Yeah.
So it's,
But one of our elders, who I've known for a long time, he became a Christian through a couple of us when he was doing his PhD, maybe 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And his experience of becoming a Christian was he would be coming to church, and he decided one day as he heard the sermon, I'm going to get up and I'm going to take communion because I think the act of that is my piece in the puzzle that says, I believe this. And as he ate the bread and drank the cup, he went, this is true. And he led communion the last time I was at our church. And I thought, that's a big statement. So what we've made it almost, it's corporal in the sense of you're tearing the loaf open. There is a bit of drama to it in that sense.
yeah. So you don't do the kind of mini bits of bread cut up and the little cups, the drop of grape juice.
Well,
you don't do.
you know, it's when you go, here's a little bit of bread. You go, behold the generosity of our God. You're kind of looking at it. So
I'm with you.
yeah.
I'm with
So
you.
it's the full loaf. But what I've experienced with our people is they're saying, we want to make Sunday expression of church a very thick experience of church and community. So people will stay for an hour and a half afterwards and go, we have an afternoon service, and go out for dinner as well. So we're saying, give us that big chunk of your Sunday, and we will, in one sense, it's a withdrawal in order to return. There's a bit of Benedict option happening in a mini form every Sunday, that we withdraw together to be informed and built and worship God together, and we go out to return to Monday. So I've said to people at church, my job here, as I'm preaching, as I said it, is not to get you to do my job better. My job here is to equip you for Babylon tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I want to see happen. And our young people feel that that's what they need.
Yeah.
Steve, can I take you back now to right at the very beginning? You gave me a bit of a cultural analysis, and then I interrupted you with your blog article, and I just felt you had some more to say there.
Look, it's hard to know, predict everything about what's going to happen in the culture. David said this in the past in conversation, that it's never been more hostile, but it's never been more open.
Yeah.
You would put it that way.
Absolutely. That's the, you know, and I think you see a biblical paradigm there as well, because if you're talking about it, we are the savour of Christ. To some, we are the stench of death, and to others, we're the perfume of life. And the thing is, we're not able to determine which is which. You know, we can't target people. We can't say we're going to do this group, this group, this group. I think in the coming years, we'll be astonished at who is converted and astonished at who walks away.
Yes, and I think that cultural thing, the press for the cultural issue will always present itself as another gospel. This is where I think our generations didn't read it as well as we could have. We're expecting the zombie apocalypse at one level, and as Mark Sayer says, it's more of a beautiful apocalypse. It's very bright and shiny. It's a facade, but what's on offer is another gospel. It's a good news story. It's a salvation story, and you even see that. And this is where I think one of the big problems, one of the big pressure points will be, is as we see the celebrity pastor fall away rate increase, as we've seen that, you see it on Twitter, wherever, the narrative is never...
What do you think is going on there?
There's push and pull factors, and I've written about this recently. I think there are things in the church that the church has gotten wrong, and it needs to... There's no way around that, and we're seeing it played out. So the chickens have come home to roost at one level. But the pull factors are very strong in the culture, that in 1500, say, to take Charles Taylor from a secular age, in 1500, if you left the church, you go to the cold, bracing loneliness out on the edge. To leave the church today is a new salvation story.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's a crowd to welcome you as you leave.
So Dawkins used to have a conversion corner for people which is really a deconversion corner. But that's what they talk about. They talk about being converted to atheism. And it's interesting, if you see, you know, Marty Sampson, I've never been at such peace.
Yeah, the language is also very
Josh,
religious.
it's very religious language. It's very it's salvation by apostasy.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a new thing in Christian culture in the West.
Yes, and that's the pull factor, I think. And what you want to be able to say to your people isn't just, smoke and mirrors so they avoid looking at that.
Yeah.
You want to say, I want to show you how that looks like a salvation story, but it's a parody of salvation.
Broken cisterns.
Yeah. And so what you want to say is we want to thicken up our salvation story so strongly and make it look so that what it says on the can had better be what's inside.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge to the church, that we can't just present a marketing program that says community or that says love or that says service and people come in and it's not those things. And so that's where we have, that's the challenge, because over here you can get a form of community, a form of service and a form of love as well if you leave, and you will be embraced. And I think that's a huge challenge coming up.
I started by calling it living and fishing in Babylon. What's going on with work and the culture changes of going to work at the moment? Because you both are with City Bible Forum.
Yeah, I think work's more of a challenge than it's ever been. Work takes up more of our lives. The idea that suddenly, maybe 30 years ago, that work would be less and less and we'd have to figure out what to do with our leisure time hasn't happened.
Yep.
Work is also a place where there is much more of a social agenda about this is what the good life looks like. We want it to look this way, and it's quite a progressive agenda. And if you don't sign up to that, you're probably swimming against the stream.
We're getting a question from some people talking about what do I do when my company wants me to put the Wear It Purple or the Pride thing on my email, and it's a company-wide edict. What do you say to that person, that Christian person who is struggling at that point with what to do?
Well, you may lose your job.
You may lose your job, or you can turn it as well, because I think, for example, the rainbow flag, that's ours.
Yeah.
I mean, when I ran Solas, we had rainbow as the thing, and people said, what are you doing, trying to indicate, I said, no, we were there first. But I think the issue that we both agree about, and I think this is important to grasp, if this is true, and, who knows, I believe this is true, I think there's a tendency to see amongst people like us who are Christian professionals to think, well, work is a place where people will go and they'll evangelize, and we also want them to stand up for their faith, which for me is easy to say because it's not my work and I'm not going to lose my job for standing up for the Christian faith. I'm going to be enhanced in my job, but they could. And so I think teaching people how to be as wise as serpents, and as harmless as doves in Babylon is going to be a huge part of it. And I think we are there back to the first century, or heading back there, back to Tertullian, where in his Apologia, he says, when it's too sunny, you say the Christians to the lions. When it rains, the Christians to the lions. He says, all of us, we are everywhere. We are in your not temples. He says, we're not in your brothels or your temples, but we're everywhere else. We're in your army, we're in your palaces, we're in your shops, we're everywhere. And I want to say that about Christians.
To do good.
And we're there to do good. I would say that someone who's employed in a job is employed to do that job, and they have to be the best Christian witness they can by doing that job. There are times when they will be forced to bow down, like Naaman was, and you ask, where are you going to fight on this? Where are you going to?
And that's going to be a hard one to figure, because some of it's going to be in conscience. But I also would say that with Dave on this, that the best way to support people in church who are working as a person in ministry is to acknowledge that it is hard out there and that it's become harder. So 25, 26 years ago when I was getting into ministry, it was like, you're taking a hit for the team, you're going into ministry, it's hard. A young woman who has been involved with us on staff at an intern level and possibly in the future, her concern was the other way around. That by going into church work, I'm going into what I call an SJW.
I'm running away.
SJW, Shelter Jesus Workshop. And so she's feeling like the workplace is the place that's the pointy end of discipleship. And church is a kind of a safe place because you're not going to lose your job, but we could. And I think it's a place of cultural negotiation. You read Daniel and you think, well, Daniel didn't eat the food, so it was about identity, but he did do the magic arts. What is the equivalent today? And it's as you as a church together work those things out. But I think creating space in your church programs, or taking maybe programs out, to allow people who work to come and talk about those things with their ministry people is good, because it will inform your sermons if you're thinking, I need to think about how these people are going to engage their week
Yeah.
in work this week, and my sermons have to give them something to do that.
Now, different tack. We're on the pastor's heart, and each week we ask our guests, what has God been doing on your heart? Let's start with you, Steve.
In the recent, you're saying?
Well, whatever.
Yeah. It's interesting that the last few months I've been reading through the, 1-2 Thessalonians, and I've been chipping into 1 Corinthians at the moment, and the return of Jesus has struck me again. The awe-filled fact of that it's somehow, when it falls off the radar of the church, it seems to fall off the radar of the church in some respects, that the thought that Jesus is coming back sobers me up a lot at the moment, because it's natural for it to fall off. And it's always been natural for it to fall off, because you read Hebrews, do not neglect to meet together, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And I think, do we come to church thinking the day's approaching, the day's approaching, the day's approaching? And I would want to say to people, our hope isn't actually in whether we get this culture back. Our hope is in Jesus returning and bringing a kingdom. It doesn't say let's create the kingdom, and there's a secular way of creating the kingdom and there's a religious way of creating the kingdom. It says Jesus is bringing a kingdom. And all our efforts that are good and true and noble are fractured realities of what Jesus will do when he returns. So that's at a cosmic level. And at the personal level, I've been thinking at 52 years of age, keep going. Jesus is coming back. Now, I might die now. I mean, who ever thought they were going to die before Jesus came back when they were 25? And suddenly I'm 52, and I'm thinking, wow, either way, this is going to finish at some stage.
Yeah.
And I think that for me at 52, it's the next stage. What does that look like to be godly? What does it look like to live for Jesus in the next 20 years of my life?
David, your heart? And God?
Yeah, I feel that I came here in July. I left a church, I've been for 27 years, where I was very happy. I preached God's word to the people every single Sunday. I was able to engage in cultural evangelism in the wider culture and do lots of different things. And all of a sudden, I come to a country that is different, away from friends and family, and to a completely different job. I feel like I've jumped off the cliff, and I'm still not quite sure where I've landed yet. In a sense, the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places, because I do love being here. But it's that burden for outreach and evangelism. Part of me in my heart has been saying, what are you doing? You wake up in the morning and you go, what are you doing? They keep asking me, and I say, I don't know. But part of me also is this tremendous trust that God opens doors, and I've seen that. Just even in the short while of being here. Came here because I wanted to be involved in evangelism and outreach, and already that's been possible. It's been great working with Steve, and so what God is doing in my heart is simply saying, you don't know, but I do, and you have to trust me. I know that. I'm a pastor. I teach that. In theory, I know that. Yeah. But it's a bit like saying, well, go do it. Say, yeah, I can do it anytime. Well, do it.
I imagine also you must be grieving the loss of all of those deep relationships and that kind of thing.
Nobody in my church in St. Peter's in Dundee knows of that church without me as their minister. Yeah. They've never had a time when that was the case for anyone there now. And so that's hard, and there are people you've grown up with, there are people you've baptized, and you've baptized their children as well, and people you've married. There's a deep sense of loss, and also for me there's a deep sense of loss of the cultural engagement within the country, because I feel a little bit, have I left my country? And the answer is, well, no, I've had to go and preach the gospel elsewhere. It's the same gospel, people are the same. Jesus died for people in Australia and China and elsewhere as much as he died for people in Scotland.
But how do you deal with the kind of, I think the answer is trusting God, but there's a pastoral trouble over in Dundee, and you hear it, and you know that 9 months ago you would have been on the scene to solve it, and now you're on the other side of the world and hearing about it.
It's the advantage of being an older pastor, because I'm older than Steve, I'm 57, but it is the advantage in this. I had grown to a stage in my life, in my pastoral ministry, where I didn't think I could solve anyone's problems. So my tendency as a younger pastor was to go, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix
Yeah.
this. And then in my latter years of ministry, I used to say to people, Coldplay's Fix You is not our theme tune here in this church. We can't fix you. Only Jesus can. Don't trust in me as your Savior. And bizarrely, that gave me an enormous freedom and worked better in healing people. You know, as long as I thought I couldn't heal them, then God did. When I thought I could fix them, so in a sense, I can't fix the situation back home, but I still have my prayer list. I pray for they're not out of my heart. You know, I can name lists or screeds of people that I don't say, all right, now I've left you, I've forgotten about you, because it's, was it Piper's thing, brothers, we are not professionals? That's my family.
Yeah.
I'm getting a new family here, an extended family, and that's great. You know, but so you grieve, but not as do others.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Thank you, gentlemen. My guests on the Pastor's Heart today have been David Robertson and Steve McAlpine. David, of course, the director of the Third Space, and Steve McAlpine, the national communicator of that, both with the City Bible Forum.